I've had a long career with visceral leishmaniasis. I first started working on discovery and development of new drugs for visceral leishmaniasis in 1981. During that time, I've worked at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I've also worked at a pharmaceutical company. It was what in the States they call Burroughs Wellcome. In the UK, it was the Wellcome Foundation. And I was also the first R&D director of DNDi, the Drugs for Neglected Diseases initiative. And throughout that time, I've had a strong, not just interest, but commitment to bring new treatments to patients. I've been successful in some ways. I've been part of the teams that discovered and developed miltefosine and liposomal amphotericin B. And it's been very interesting to see how they've been used or misused in the treatment of this disease. I started talking with Ido, or with Philippe Guérin, about 3 years ago on the idea of having a proper archive for all the clinical studies that have been done on visceral leishmaniasis. And knowing what has been done over the years in not just three continents, in Europe, in South and Central America, in East Africa, and also in the Indian subcontinent, I've got a good idea of how many different types of clinical studies have been done on the several different forms of visceral leishmaniasis. Starting at the end bit first, the data management. I think the collection and archiving of the data is essential because, as I mentioned in answer to your previous question, there have been so many clinical studies done on 4 continents. None of them have actually been properly compared in terms of the outcomes of the clinical trials, the standard drugs that have been used to compare with the types of populations, whether they've been adults or children, the different forms of visceral leishmaniasis that have been really studied in these clinical trials, including this cutaneous form post-Kala-Azar dermal leishmaniasis, HIV visceral leishmaniasis. And it's only through collecting all the data together that the ability of the community to actually analyse will come about. On the ethical front, ethics is linked to me, in my mind, to governance. Governance is about inclusion and also stakeholder inclusion. And I think it's one of the essential parts of EDO that have actually included members on the advisory committee and also stakeholders from all the different endemic areas. Obviously there's a strong ethical issue to ensure that all the studies that are archived have been to the best possible ethical values. The first achievement has really been the development of a research agenda, which has been to really define the priorities of what can be collected from these archives, what can be analysed, what outcomes can be achieved through the analysis, and then how that can be used to improve further clinical studies and to also identify where the big gaps are in our knowledge. I think that's important. Obviously, there will be other things which I've already sort of alluded to. I think the inclusion of members of the advisory committee and also stakeholders have been consulted from all the different endemic areas in South America, Africa and the Indian subcontinent. This has been essential to building up the research community and developing them to becoming really a part of the future for EDO. The most important immediate issue is that for the first time in history there are sort of 6 candidate drugs coming through the pipeline, 3 from DNDi, 1 from Novartis and 2 from a GlaxoSmithKline University of Dundee collaboration. As these are new drugs, they can hopefully be oral, be safer than previous drugs, and it's essential that a platform and an archiving system is already prepared so the data from these new drugs can be immediately used to compare the data to the responses of patients in the different regions against the different forms of visceral leishmaniasis to the present drugs. So I think that's the first most important issue. A second issue is that we know that as people in the future are going to want to publish in high-impact journals, there has to be some record of where the data is archived. And this is going to enable clinicians in the future to at least have a direct archiving number and facility which they can refer to in their publications.